in some of the largest organizations of the world are still so lackluster that the candidates will show up and the trainers say,
Yeah.
well, nobody brought any live weapons or ammunition, right? Because we're all
Yeah.
professionals and we're using big boy rules. It's one of my red flags that you want
Yeah.
to talk about. If I hear the term big boy rules, I press the big red stop button. I ask, what
Yeah.
does that mean? Well,
But
it's guided self-reflection.
yeah, yeah. But is there also
Guided
room for feedback?
Yeah, and how we give that feedback is everything. I mean,
Yeah.
if we're giving the feedback in a judgmental way, then we don't know how they're going to process this when they leave. It's like as a parent, we yell at our kids and say, "Go to your room and think about what you've done."
Yeah.
Well, what are they going to do? If they follow that post-hypnotic suggestion, they will go to their room and replay over and over and over again the exact same thing that got them sent to baby jail in the first place. They're not going to go to their room and start thinking about optimization strategies. They're going to actually reinforce the negative behavior, and it's not going to be likely, except that trying to move away from future pain.
Maybe, yes. So, welcome again to the Train the Trainer podcast, in which I have conversations with officers, first responders, teachers, instructors, writers, and scientists about the first responder training with the goal of bridging the gap between science and practice, and vice versa, of course. And today it's an honor to talk to Ken Murray, because as we said just before, I got his book, Training at the Speed of Life. I cannot imagine that you are a first responder trainer not having the book, but I may be a little arrogant in this, but I have it from 2005 and it came out in 2004. And it's a book, Ken, that first of all, I've waited for 20 years for part 2. And a lot of people with me, because that is seriously, I always thought, when is volume 2 coming? But maybe you can say something about that. But man, this is a book like Super Training from Mel Siff. There's so much in it, from the physiology, psychology, but especially how to build reality-based training. So thank you for writing this book, and it has been a guide. But there are not so many books I'm aware of. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Eric. It was a crime of passion.
Yeah.
Really.
Yeah.
I've always told aspiring authors that writing books is easy, but finishing them is really, really hard.
Oh, that's great. Yeah.
And as I was making my way through all of this, I'd had notes, and I've got shelves of, as you said, volume 2. I got shelves of volume 2 and all sorts of other things, but putting them together in a cogent manner.
Yeah.
I do things on purpose, and that book had a purpose. And smaller books, I love Rob Pincus, for instance, because Rob knows how to write a short book, and I'm trying to figure out a way to do that a little bit more deliberately, because every now and then I'll write a blog post that turns into a book, but I just haven't wrapped it in covers. When I was writing Training at the Speed of Life, I had become friends with Dave Grossman, and he said, when is your book finished? When is your book finished? I said, well, working on it. He said, every time I've spoken to you since we've known each other, you say that you're working on it. How many pages do you have? And I said, around 400 right now. He says, great, write 2 more words, the and end. And wrap a cover around it.
Yeah.
He says, you can write more books, right? I said, yeah. And so then it became 2 years worth of editing.
Yeah.
Because when you get 400 pages of stuff, you start reading it, and trying to finish it in one sitting is the most effective way, because now you have to go back and go, oh, I think I said that back someplace else. And I got flipped through, and this was really, computers were, 2004. We've had still just emerging from the era of word processors.
Yeah, true.
So it's,
and before we go into some starting questions, why did you write a book? That's the first part of the question. The second part of the question is, why the speed of life? Why is it called like that?
Oh, why did I write the book? It's because there was nothing out there. We were fumbling our way through. My former business partner and I, David Luxton, and I had long story to get us where we ended up, but the end state was creating a technology that we built a company called SIMUNITION. And SIMUNITION was a cool term that in our minds was all sorts of training munitions to allow you to simulate in a realistic fashion all of the things that you were stumbling on with conventional munitions, because you had to build these temples of safety around conventional munitions, and you couldn't shoot close at steel targets, and you certainly couldn't engage other human beings. In fact, the Cooper safety rules, the 4 rules of firearm safety, would get in the way of pointing guns at each other. And we had all sorts of people from the tops of top organizations, anywhere from generals in the military to colonels in highway patrol, saying, we're never going to do this because you violate the safety protocols of pointing guns at people.
Mm.
My thing was, how do we train people how to gunfight if we're not going to point guns at each other?
Yeah.
But I don't want to violate the safety rules. I want to manifest a training philosophy such that it fits within those. I never point a gun at anything you do not wish to shoot. Yeah, but I do want to shoot you. I just don't
Yeah.
want to kill you. I want to shoot you in simulation. So it is intentional. I'm doing this intentional. But how do we now build safety rules around that that fit within the existing rules and not violate them to the point where people become accepting of that? And so I got into this as a technology guy,
Yeah.
and then I realized that people were utilizing the technology in the way from its where it came from. It came from paintball, right? Dave Luxton and his partner Steve Caron were developing paintball fields all across America. They'd seen the adventure game down in the States, and that was very compelling, and it was recreationally sound. And so they started building fields in Canada, and they wanted to build their own gun, and they did. And that's sort of how Dave and I became involved with each other. But when people got a hold of our eventual technology, the cartridge-based technology, they started using it as an elimination tool,
Mm.
just like laser tag or
Yeah.
the smile system or any other type of tool or technology. Turn my little dinger off on my phone here. Any other tool or technology that would you'd get hit with one of these things and it's bang bang, you're dead. That's why blanks fell out of favor in
Mm.
a lot of ways, because they'd shoot blanks at each other and they go bang bang, I got you first, I got you better, I got you sooner, I got you cleaner, I got you more times. And so there'd be this argument, shut up, model, and it didn't work. I think I might have dropped out there for a second. I saw you freeze. Did
Yeah,
you
I'm
catch?
still there. Yeah, I
Okay.
get. Yeah, yeah.
And so in the competitive utilization of this, which is any paintball game or any laser tag field, you're eliminating people.
Yeah.
It's a chess game. I take your pawn with my rook, you take your rook with my queen, and it's over in one move. And I thought, well, that doesn't work. We have to change this such that it is not a competitive technology. And so I had to develop training methodologies in order to go beyond the elimination technology. And then we found that trainers found it exhilarating to shoot students. Want to be a role player today? The SWAT guys would sign up in droves because it was target practice for role players. And it
Yeah.
was still maybe from a well-intentioned perspective, thinking, well, if I make it really, really hard for them in training, they're going to rise to the occasion and in the real world. But that's just not it. And so, although I started with technology, I started working on how to utilize the technology, but then I began to truly understand that we're playing around with the belief systems of people,
Yeah.
that we are brain surgeons with rusty instruments and no formal training, poking around inside the experiential brains of people. How dare we? And so now I had to reinvent myself and almost become an accidental psychologist. I had to study all of the psychology of all these things and how the brain actually works and how we make that contextual and how we weave in philosophy of all of these things to a success-based learning model that
Yeah.
we now call the Temple of Awesome.
Yeah.
Where
Okay.
if you give me the gift of your vulnerability, first of all, I need to earn it. But if you give me the gift of your vulnerability, I have an obligation to galvanize it into something that is absolutely undefeatable.
Yeah.
And we can do that systemically. There's a process to that which is counterintuitive to a lot of places. In fact, the training at the speed of life, that's put people into realistic, lifelike situations.
Yeah.
But how do we do that? We have to blend the art and blend the science and understand the humanistic nature of people that are putting themselves in physiological and emotional harm's way
Yeah.
in order to prepare them for the moment of greatest dread. And nowhere better do we see this than in canine training.
Yeah.
We were to do to our people what we do to dogs in training, they'd be better off. They'd be better off because you never ever leave the dog as a failure. You work the dog until he gets the bite. You work the dog until he finds the dope. You work the dog until he stays on point. And when you send him, he goes. And when you stop him, he stops. And when you recall him, he returns.
Yeah.
So that the dog can almost work independently of the trainer because he knows the job so well.
So if I'm correct, the genesis of your book was you went from the company SIMUNITION with the technology, that there was no training philosophy, and you researched it by yourself, and you wrote the book. And the speed of life, if I'm correct, is because it's dynamic, it's alive, it's with
Yes.
yeah, great. Well, we go into effective training later on, but first I want to start,
Good.
if it's okay for you, with some
Yeah.
yes or no questions. Although
Okay.
I know, of
Sure.
course, that and
Yes.
the first yes, the first yes or no question is are officers killed in training?
Yes, they are. And they're not just killed during training. They can be prepared for failure beyond the training and actually programmed for future failure. Let me give you a famous example.
Yes.
Everyone in America is familiar with Trooper Coates.
Mm.
Trooper Coates was driving up and down the highway in I-95 attached to a high-risk unit, the ACE team, they called them, and their job was to find pretextual reasons to pull people over looking for guns, dope, contraband going up and down this pipeline of Interstate 95, which is one of the main from north to south interstate highways in America. And so they they created this interdiction team. And Trooper Coates pulled a guy over, found some reason, and was asking permission to search his car, as they often would. And people surprisingly go, "Yeah, go ahead and search my car. I got nothing to hide." And during this moment, he had the guy at the back of the car in front of his dash camera, and he said, "Hey, I just gotta pat you. Make sure you haven't got any weapons on you. It's just something we gotta do." And there seemed no pre-crime indicators on this guy. He was just a roly-poly, aw shucks, sawed-off guy, about 5'8". Trooper Coates was about 6'2", big guy, former Marine. And he goes, "What's that, your wallet?" He's just patting him, making assumptions. "Yeah, what's that, your wallet? What's that?" And Blackburn had his hand in his front pocket. He said, "Take your hand out of your pocket. Take your hand out of your pocket." And when he takes his hand out of his pocket, he's got this little tiny 22 revolver.
Mm.
And he bowls Coates over like a bowling ball and stands over top of him, pointing this little 22, saying he's going to kill him. And Coates is beginning to struggle with this guy, bites him, gets his own gun out of his holster, shoots him, point blank rounds with 3.57 Magnum revolver. Blam, blam, blam. Bites his way to a shoot. Blam, blam. Shoots him again. Stands over him with a gun, with his radio, talking to him. And because in that time there were no post-shooting behaviors that anybody would be trained with. You had a target, it would turn, it would edge, it would turn, bangity, bangity, bang, cease fire. The video simulations that would occur at the time, and even today, in many of the video simulations on the simulators, the situation will happen. If it's a shoot situation, bang, 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 and the scenario stops. Or in live action role play, quite often trainers will wait for a gunfire to go off and then blow the whistle immediate. There was no post-action shooting stuff. We've got some stuff now. We've got cover condition communication and controlled which is about 16 things that we do after the gunfire, but there was nothing after that. And so I took personal responsibility for that early on firearms trainer, is that I didn't give him anything beyond the gunfire.
Yeah.
And so Trooper Coates was actually conditioned to stand there and do nothing after the gunfire. And so he was programmed for failure. And I can tell you that even today, 40 years later, I see so many people in live action role player have been conditioned by their organizations to get their gun back into their holster as fast as they get it out, fire a couple of shots at a static or turning target, and that's it.
Yeah.
I hate the conventional range. I despise it. It's a place where people, for the most part, learn how to ingrain behaviors that are inconsistent with the dynamic activities that you need to utilize in a gunfight. But because you got 19 other people to the left or the right,
Yeah.
you can't move forward, backwards, turn left or right. If you clear your gun from a malfunction, you're pointing your gun at somebody else. And so it's not an effective use of training space.
What percentage of training should be done on the range?
Well, yeah, we need to go to the range from time to time, yeah, because real guns make noise and they jump around. That's it. But once we learn how to manage recoil and condition the mind to the realities of impulse concussion, that's all it is verifying that we can control that gun as it explodes in our hand.
Yeah.
But 99%, in my estimation, of the training needs to be done with non-conventional technologies and very realistic settings with we're calling it ecological dynamics now. You know, I didn't have that cool zoomy word back then, but early context relevance is extremely important, which I've been talking about for 4 decades. And so now at least,
Yeah.
yeah, we've got the science behind it now
Yeah.
that says if we don't have early context relevance, people will ask me, I'm going to run a 5-day school. Well, can that classroom, that big open classroom, serve as use? Can we use that for scenarios? Well, no, not really. There's no context relevance in there unless you're having a parent teacher interview in a great big classroom setting.
And
So yeah.
can you answer the question by yes,
Hmm.
officers are killed in training and in practice, and maybe,
Yes.
but there are also, because we want to talk about safety later on ook, but there are also, if I read you correctly, there are also officers killed in training, really killed by unsafety, isn't it? Is that the true? Okay.
Yeah, on an average, and if you look at the back of the book, as you recall, I think I've got 32 dead people memorialized
Yeah.
in the back of Trying to Stay Alive. And that trend has continued. In fact, in the past 18 months, there have been 12 shootings with approximately 6 fatalities. And so there's an
Yeah.
increase
Mm.
in the number shot and the number killed. I'm hoping this is just a blip, but
Yeah.
who knows? Too many people think that simulation training is not complicated. And
Yeah.
you know, the training protocols in some of the largest organizations of the world are still so lackluster that the candidates will show up and the trainers say,
Yeah.
"Well, nobody brought any live weapons or ammunition, right? Because we're all
Yeah.
professionals here and we're using big boy rules." It's one of my red flags that you want to
Yeah.
talk about. If I hear the term big boy rules, I press the big red stop button. I ask, "What
Yeah.
does
I want to talk about that because I have I had, as a firearms instructor, I had 2 incidents.
that?"
And luckily enough, I was saved by, well, by God or by luck, but we'll come back later to it. Because I have 2 more yes or no questions, and that is a non-lethal firearms training safe? Well,
Oh,
we
no,
already
no,
know.
it's not. It can be made safe,
Yeah,
but it is inherently dangerous
yeah,
because you're playing around with airsoft guns
yeah,
is inherently dangerous.
yeah,
And so there's nothing safe about that technology, but we can wrap safety rules and parameters around that
yeah,
technology and utilize it safely.
yeah.
Right? Does that make
Yeah,
sense?
yeah, makes sense. And we will come back to those things
Yeah.
later on. And the third one is, do law enforcement trainers really understand reality-based training or reality-based scenario training, in your opinion?
Let me answer that question with a question. What does reality-based training mean, Eric?
Well, it seems to me, that always seems to me, that reality-based training is preparing officers for the real world.
Okay.
But now it becomes more nuanced in the way that uh, is that the same as realistic training? Is that the same as high fidelity all the time? Should we always train high fidelity with the same stuff, same circumstances? And what I learned in other fields in the military and emergency medicine, it's not always necessary to do high fidelity.
Mhm.
But so to come back to your question, as far as I know, it is preparing office for the reality.
Well, and I like the fact that you've left it open like that because you've created a much larger umbrella.
Ah,
If you play the Family Feud game and have 100 people surveyed and ask, what does reality-based training mean? Most of them will equate it with projectile-based opposed force training.
mm,
And that's one slice
yeah,
of reality-based training, but reality-based training really is any tool, technology, or methodology that utilizes in a training environment those things to prepare you for the real environment. And so um, video simulators are one type of reality-based training. Conventional gunfire in a controlled range is a type of reality-based training. Marking cartridges, a type of reality-based training. Theater of the mind,
mm,
just sitting, closing your eyes, and utilizing your imagination is a type of reality-based training because you're activating those memories on a multi um, sensual level to
yeah,
rebuild this experience inside
yeah,
your mind that you can utilize. And so, if we're going to utilize these tools, technologies, or methodologies, then we need to know how to utilize them properly. Because if you utilize your internal imagery, and I specifically say internal imagery, not
mhm,
internal pictures, because some people use pictures, some people use
yeah,
sounds, there's
yeah,
multi-dimensional people. But internal imagery, if you utilize your internal imagery poorly, you can actually catastrophize and prepare yourself for failure. By way of example, phobias.
yeah,
Phobias are internal imagery that utilize for catastrophe to the extent where you walk into a room and you have a heart palpitations because there's a cricket on the floor.
yeah,
There's nothing dangerous about the cricket, but you're having an emotion to that based on some previous experience, and so you catastrophize the presence of the cricket. And so it's the same thing with marking cartridges. If you can use them for fair or you can use them for foul, you can use them to prepare for success, you can use them
yeah,
to program for failure. And so most trainers have no clue about the expansiveness of reality-based training, and so therefore they throw around these terms in an educated or unpredictable way with the belief that people know what they're talking about. I think I sent to you, and it's posted on the RBTA website, the glossary of
yeah.
terms.
You did, yes.
It's like 62 pages of all of this terminology, which has kindly been contributed. Chris Butler from Raptor Protection and Teaching the Methods of Instruction course, and great course, by
Yeah,
the way, teaching that course. And Chris also finally got to building a glossary, and he was kind enough to allow me to, with attribution, you see
yeah,
asterisks where the MOI terminology is being used. And so you can go through there and go, that's what ecological dynamics means, or that's what stop, stop, stop means, right?
yeah,
And so we can use commonality of language so that I'm not saying, hey, Eric, go grab me a box of SIMUNITIONs, and you come skittering back with a box of Green Shield frangible ammunition that I've handed off to somebody that doesn't know what they're doing, and now somebody gets shot with a
yeah,
frangible bullet
yeah.
because we use lazy language.
So what we've answered now is our officers are killed in training, yes, and also on the streets because of bad training. And is non-lethal firearms training safe? Well, it depends if you do it correctly. Yeah, and we come into the safety. And now we came to the conclusion that presumably not every law enforcement trainer, and I say it kindly, is knows exactly what reality-based training is. And but what is reality-based training then? And from the viewpoint of effective reality-based scenario training, and man, you wrote you wrote such a big book, so yeah, you can do a whole semester with it. Um, I have some questions from the chapters of the book, but maybe you can just, yeah, if a trainer is listening right now, what is the best thing we can do to give a short, I mean, not an hour, but to give a decent answer to the question how to design and facilitate reality-based training. Is that
Well,
vague
the
enough? Yeah.
first, yeah, the first step would be to slow down and understand that you really don't know what you don't know. And I'm talking to many, many trainers out there. They've been thrust into into this role, and now they're in charge of the simulation training program, the reality-based training program, the experiential learning program, whatever it is that they want to call it. And maybe they've got a dynamic simulator, they've got a TI training machine or a FATS machine or a Virtua machine. Maybe they've got these things, and so now they're in charge of that. And maybe they've inherited a dozen marking cartridge guns and a bucket full of old, decrepit personal protective equipment that they're digging through, or whatever it is that they have, whatever they're using. All of those are tools. It's like inheriting your grandfather's garage, and now you walk into his garage and you got all of these tools, and maybe he had a small box of tools, and maybe he had a full shop. But I think it was in one of the Socratic dialogues in the Republic, they had a discussion about uh, tools that could teach a man their own use are beyond price.
Mm.
And so just because you got this box of rocks doesn't mean you know how to throw rocks good,
Yeah.
right? And so we've got such a limited amount of time available to us as trainers, and there's so much that they need to dump into the training on an annual basis that in many ways it just becomes a liability box check. And so the first thing you need to do is consider building a program. And I can almost feel the pushback and the arms folding. Oh, we've already got a program. I submit for your consideration that you have a project, and it's probably a well-intentioned project. But do you have your own policies and procedures? Do you have all of your written guidelines? Do you have a scenario book that looks like that, such that that's a scenario? And you decide you're going to pull down that scenario and you're going to look at Officer X, and Officer X is entering the organization and hasn't even availed himself of any of the scenario-based training yet. And so we're looking at Officer X, and this year he's going to run scenario 1, 2, and 3. And Officer Y has been with us for a year, so now he's going to be running scenario 4, 5, and 6. And Officer Z has been here for 3 years now, so he's writing scenario 7, 8, and 9, or following scenario 7, 8, and 9. They will reach into their little box and go, hey, who wants to be a role player this week? You want to come down and knuckle some recruits? And that everything is ad hoc. I can almost guarantee you that the vast majority of people listening to this do not have contract role players. They don't have continuity of skill sets in the role player realm, that they don't have continuity of behavioral sets within the scenarios that are presented, that they put something in action. Typically they'll have a 3x5 card that has some directions on there and a little bit of a situational thing that's going to be happening. And then the role player will change behaviors between every single run coming through because they get bored after the first 2 or 3 runs. And now they have to get into the entertainment for themselves, or they go insane mode. Or a student will do something, so they think, well, here's an opportunity for me to do something interesting. Oh, they're presenting their firearm side, so I think I'm just going to grab their gun and see what happens. That, Eric, is experimental training.
Yeah.
If you don't know what the outcome ought be based on the thing that we've trained our people to do these things, and now we're seeing the consolidation of the things that they've done in an experiential testing realm, then you have a reality-based training project, not a reality-based training program.
Yeah.
And so I would offer to organizations that they could take a 5 to 7 year approach and bring their entire organization through this diverse realm of increasingly complicated problems that get everybody in the organization to an end state.
Yeah.
Now, in the beginning, there are the bread and butter for law enforcement, at least in North America, is you're going to have things involving cars, things involving people in conflict, and sneaky people doing sneaky people stuff. And then the outliers of mass shootings and all of the other things that happen out there. But even if we're dealing with the mass shootings or the catastrophic events,
Mm-hmm.
the way those are solved are with very simple things. If you look at any complicated problem, it's the thing that solves it is the simple thing. In an active threat, move to contact. If he surrenders, great. If he doesn't, shoot him. That's it, right? In the world of North American football, the most offensive team on the field is defense, because defense has a single goal: get the guy with the football. That's it.
Yeah.
Get the guy with the football. And so that's our job
Yeah.
in these things, is solve the problem. And when you get to solving the problem, we all know about John Boyd's OODA loop: the observe, orient, decide, and act. Most people get tripped up during orientation and decision. In the early days, they don't even see it because they don't know what they're looking for. So observation is a big thing. But if they can't even see it because they have no experience, then having them trip over orientation and decision with ineffective action makes no sense at all, because all they're doing is practicing failure. So orientation and decision is where the experience lives. When they get to action in the OODA loop, then they can really do one of four things. And I ask anybody listening to me that if you come up with a fifth one, write to me and I will make it 5 and I'll name it after you. But in the 4 decades of doing this, I've seen that there's 4 things that you can do. You can talk, you can fight, you can shoot, or you can leave once you get to action.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so talking, if we're going to use Tung Fu, talking is a set of skills.
Yeah.
And we need to know how to utilize those skills. And I've seen no better analysis of that than with John Azar Dickens, who's a Rome, Georgia police officer. He was a psychologist and then he became a cop. And John came up with his little matrix. He calls it the TEB model. And I know that Force Science is teaching their realistic de-escalation program. And it's a really, really good program.
Yeah.
And so the TEB model is thinking: is it clear or contaminated? Emotions, are they high or low? Behavior, is it compliant or non-compliant? And then there are conversational postulates or directive communication skills that can be plugged into any of those 8 permutations of those 3 things. And so talking matters. So we can talk, we can fight.
Yeah.
Do you have the physical skills to fight? Are you going to fight with your empty hands? Are you going to fight with your tools? So now we're getting into Kung Fu, or we get into Gun Fu. Kung Fu, or Gun Fu, all of the Fus. And if we understand all of the different permutations of those Fus and have the capacity for flow state between the tools in a useful way, then we can start solving all of these problems more deliberately. But
going back to the trainer, because we wanted them to be effective. I try to summarize what you're saying. They need programs, not projects, and I can imagine that it's goal directed for a longer term and so on.
Yes.
And they have to know what's in the toolbox. By the way, in Holland we have, because we are such a small country, there is a kind of a standardized Dutch model, and the officers on the lowest level are 2 years in school, and even a higher level 3 years, and then 4 years. So they're a long time on school. And the teacher training program is also at least 1 year, and they get some like I think they get a good solid foundation in when to do scenario training, when to do role playing, and so on. And it's not optimal, but I think it's really steady, I think.
Well,
I,
and I like the standardization of that, as long as we know what we're looking for.
yeah,
Academia is a double-edged sword.
yeah.
Academia has to
I mean, police academy, not
oh no, yeah,
sorry. Yeah,
but your police academy
yeah,
is utilizing academics
yeah, and
and
traditions. Yeah,
yeah, which is great because
yeah,
science allows us to study things, but it also requires we study things in isolation.
yeah,
And so this is where art and science really need to blend together.
yeah,
Right? There was I'm going to butcher the guy's name, but Newhausen or Neuenhaus or
yeah. Art and New House. Yes. Yeah,
yeah, it's great study
yeah,
that he wanted to see the pressure where one is just a photographically realistic target of somebody, and then it's a person
yeah,
standing there doing the same thing, and just the presence of a human being standing there changed things. And then the little bit of pressure ended up showing that we were able to utilize that pressure in a useful way,
yeah,
and really get people leveling up a little bit for later testing that showed that there was not only just some retention, but there was some transfer there.
yeah,
Another great delineation that folks like For Science and Chris Butler have been able to look at all of the academic studies to come up
yeah,
with these great terms. If we have retention but no transfer, because it doesn't, the things that we're teaching don't morph into a unique or a novel setting,
yeah,
then what's the point of learning things? And
yeah,
so if we don't have the appropriate amount of time, and we don't have a useful facilitation model. I've been teaching dynamic facilitation for probably 25 to 30 years.
What is that?
Dynamic facilitation. Socratic and dynamic facilitation require us to walk all the way back through to the beginning of the scenario and get into a student's mind of what they were thinking and their positional aspects of things.
Mm.
And this requires our role players to be very well trained, know exactly what they are. They're like actors, they need to
Yeah,
hit their mark, they need to hit their lines. Because if they're just making things up,
yeah,
then we're triggering people in ways that is not reproducible.
yeah,
And if we've got people going through these scenarios, and as a trainer, if we wait until the end of the scenario or wait until the end of a series of scenarios and then just go back into the classroom and talk about what happened, you're just missing all sorts of learning opportunity, because you're essentially talking to people that are checked out.
yeah,
They've gone internal, not external.
yeah,
And I need people to be shuttling back and forth during a dynamic facilitation between internal and external. And there's language that we utilize for that. I've been studying precision language for at least 3 decades. I'm going to drive some of the academics nuts right now when I say I believe in neuro-linguistic
yeah.
programming, because neuro-linguistic programming is a voodoo art that a lot of academics will immediately cross their arms and shut off because I just said the word NLP. In fact, I've almost been into dangerous situations from
Ah,
academics that don't like NLP, but I don't care.
no.
It's a language that the meta model of clarifying language, where we can drill down to find out what people are actually saying,
Yeah,
is used for so many different things. Use it with your kids. How was your day, son? Fine.
yeah,
Yeah, all right. Well, I guess your day was fine. Communication stops. It's the same thing with scenario-based facilitation. So, what did you do that for?
yeah,
And all of a sudden, we've taken them out of resource state. They cross their arms. Now they got to rationalize and back rationalize the
yeah,
thing that they did. That's stupid. That'll get you killed in a real situation. You better not do that. Here's what you should have done. You're using your 50 caliber finger, shaming people. And even if what you're saying is valid, you're talking to a sad little bobblehead who's just nodding their head like that, waiting for the scolding to be done so that they can get out from under your stern and steely gaze.
And what are good questions to ask? I wanted to go to the interventions points because I really love
Yes.
that part of the book, but it's also with feedback, eh?
Hmm.
Um, what is a good question to? You have the rule of three, but I'm not sure where I can find it. Where you say something like conclusions to scenarios. There are different conclusions, natural, unnatural, and there are intervening points. And I think there comes precision language also into play. Isn't that true?
Well, yeah, precision language is essential for these things because if you don't if you don't come at the facilitation portion with a genuine frame, NLP term, framing,
Yeah.
you need a genuine frame of curiosity,
Yeah.
which means I need to suspend my judgmental frame independent of what it is that they did
Yeah.
and be genuinely curious. And the curiosity needs to be borne out with tone. It needs to be borne out with body language. It needs to be borne out with the actual language. You know, I noticed you walk into the room and you immediately went to the center of the room.
Yeah.
What's going on there? What are you thinking as you move to that position? Rather than, hey dummy, you didn't look left or right when you were walking in and you went straight to the middle of the room and you didn't have any clue as to what was going on behind you.
So can you just show it me? I'm not sure if it works, but say for example, I'm in a training, I'm in a scenario, I have to approach together with my colleague a subject. The subject is already I'm making that on the spot. So the subject is already on his knees with his hands on his head. We have both our guns out. Now I'm walking towards the subject and I'm walking into the fire line of my colleague because my positioning is very bad. Okay. Well, maybe that's enough. What are good questions then? Or what is how do you intervene? What's going on then?
That simple situation that you just described has so many different levels of complexity. It does.
Yeah.
And if a trainer doesn't understand what those levels of complexity are, it's really easy at that point to yell at people saying you just put yourself in or your partner in harm's way. In fact, there's this one video, I believe it came out of Belgium,
Hmm.
where you can see two guys stacked on a door and they've obviously chased an armed offender into this thing and they're getting ready to make entry
Yeah.
into this room, and all of a sudden the offender pops out of another door and has the gun displayed, and they both turn at that direction. They both got their guns out, and now you've got these two guys pointing that way. Now you got these guys pointing that way with this guy behind this guy, and he puts a bullet into his back. Now it's a marking cartridge, so there's no consequences to that, but you could just see the both of them
Yeah.
deflated.
Yeah.
Ah, I don't know how that got facilitated. It didn't go beyond that. But in situations like that, I would immediately go, well, that was interesting.
Hmm.
What's going on here? What? And so you ask some questions. So I'm going to backpedal a little bit. The essence, I'll give you the essence of the questions first.
Yeah.
And then we'll talk about the precision language and the nature of how we ask those questions. So the questions are basically, what did you do? Why did you do it? Can we, should we do that? And then the sub part to that is if we can, if we should, if so, why? If not, why not? So what did you do? But asking someone what did they do with a judgmental tone of voice and body language,
Yeah.
if you ask your dog that question, what did you do? And
Yeah.
all of a sudden, the dog just gets really, really defensive, and his eyes go down, and his ears go flat, and his tail starts tucking because he's being scolded. You ask the dog, what did you do? What did you do? And all of a sudden, the dog is enthusiastic, right? And so we need to be cautious of that. But I'm genuinely curious as to what they did.
Yeah.
And then when I want to know their justification or rationalization for their action, anytime we ask why, we immediately take people out of resource state
Hmm.
because they need to go from external to internal. They need to start imagining what they did and now start building rationalizations around it because they don't want to be wrong,
Hmm.
right? In the Temple of Awesome, there's no such thing as wrong. And if you read Socratic dialogues from something like Plato's Republic, when he was taking his students down philosophical pathways, there were no wrong answers. There were just statements that he sharpened with more deliberate questions. And so Socrates was one of the most profound meta modelers in the history of sharpening language.
Yeah.
And through utilizing those questions, he would lead his students down a philosophical pathway that he already knew the answer to. Scenario-based training or experiential learning, we should already know the answer or the small range of answers to the questions that we're asking in an experiential way.
Yeah.
Because that's what a scenario is. A scenario is a question. We're
That's
putting
beautiful.
people, isn't that interesting?
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah.
A scenario is a question.
Yeah.
And if they don't know the answer, that's our fault. Why are we putting people, why are we testing something they don't know the answer to? If we're
Yeah.
testing something they don't know the answer to because we haven't taught it to them, that's an experiment, not an
And
experience.
so you laid out the art of good questions.
Yeah.
Can you please give the three what
Well, yeah.
what
What did you do? Why did you
yeah
do it? Can should we do that?
yeah
Once they say, well, can we do that?
mm,
You know, well, I can, but should we? What gives us the authority to do that? And I don't care if what they did was absolutely textbook perfect
mhm,
or something that's completely off the charts. I was
yeah
in a large metropolitan city where they were sort of replicating. There was a big deal that happened a number of years ago. There was a college professor who'd locked himself out of his house. And so he was essentially breaking into his own house. But the neighbors didn't recognize the guy. They called the police. The police showed up, did what they ought to do for an unknown offender, and treated him as if he was a dangerous offender. This particular guy took a case of offense to it, got all sorts of ramifications for the officers that did that, and there were race issues involved, and the president of the United States got involved. I mean, it was just this huge thing that never had to happen. And in this big city, they decided they were going to replicate that. So they had this guy breaking into his own house. So the neighbor in this scenario that did the calling, they went and interviewed the neighbor. Do you know this guy? No, I don't know that guy. I don't recognize that guy. And so this particular agency grabbed this neighbor and used him as a human shield to go up to this
mm,
potential offender.
aha
So from a officer safety and a liability perspective and a policy and procedures perspective, this was just wrong on so many levels. But we didn't immediately go, that's idiotic. You can't use a neighbor that called you for a call to service as a human shield. But we were curious. And rather than give them the shaming around this, would you? So, basically,
yeah
what did you do? Well, I took the neighbor with me. Why did you do that? Because maybe they're an accomplice, and maybe they're compliant, and
yeah
maybe this guy's in on it. And so I don't know he's a neighbor. So I put him between me and him. Well, can we do that? What is the legality of that? What's the upside? What's the downside? And through all of that, we came to the conclusion, no, you can't do that.
yeah
Right now,
yeah sorry go on
oh, well, in something like that, you may have somebody that absolutely digs in. And we've had that on a vehicle stop. The officer gets involved to a shooting in the vehicle stop, does a great job of the shooting, goes to the back of the car, starts doing that 4C checklist, right? The cover, the condition, the communication, and the controlled breathing. And once they're working on that, we press the pause button asking, what are you thinking at this point? Oh, I'm not through yet.
mm,
Okay. So he slithers on his belly like a reptile, opens up the passenger door, puts the gun to an offender that's still breathing but's already been neutralized, and puts 2 bullets into his head.
mm,
What are you thinking now? Security shots? Can we do that? Oh, that's what I would do. But you can't do that. That's illegal. You just murdered somebody.
yeah
Yeah, but he took a shot at me. And you addressed that with appropriate gunfire. But now you're going and murdering that guy that we should be rendering medical aid to once other people are so we
Yeah.
find things out about people when we ask them questions
Yeah.
to find out if they know the right answer,
Yeah.
policy, law, and legality, or they don't.
So the essence of asking questions is
Yes.
just what you're saying now. Then you get to know what they were thinking, what they were, and of course I think this is I assume that by doing that, by stimulating self-reflection, people learn better.
Well,
But is
it guides self-reflection.
yeah, God, yeah. But is there
Got to be
also
guided.
room for feedback?
Yeah, and how we give that feedback is everything. I mean,
Yeah.
if we're giving the feedback in a judgmental way, then we don't know how they're going to process this when they leave. It's like as a parent, we yell at our kids and say, "Go to your room and think about what you've done."
Yeah.
Well, what are they going to do? If they follow that post-hypnotic suggestion, they will go to their room and replay over and over and over again the exact same thing that got them sent to baby jail in the first place. They're not going to go to their room and start thinking about optimization strategies. They're going to actually reinforce the negative behavior, and it's not going to be likely, except that trying to move away from future pain, it doesn't result in an effective strategy for future performance. Whereas if we go, honey, that thing that you did, you know that it violates one of our household attributes, and that party you were going to tonight is gone. So what I want you to do is spend a little bit of time in your room thinking about some optimization strategies, thinking of some other things that you could have done that would have I kind of know why you tried to do that, but you lied to us and you tried to sneak out.
Yeah.
And so what could you have done in order to honor the desire or need that you had within the family values that we hold so dear here? And once you figure that out, let's have a talk about that, and then we can practice that for the future.
So and if we go back to the law enforcement officer, we asked him questions. And is there a difference between asking questions and giving feedback, or is it a kind of? But giving feedback could be really giving your expert point of view on a subject. I can imagine that that is a kind of feedback.
Well, that is one type of feedback,
Yeah.
and we talk about oughta do's, gotta do's, and nice to do's,
Hmm.
right? So the oughta do's, they should, or the gotta do's, I should say, the gotta do's, they should have been trained in the gotta do's, right? Why are we testing something they've never learned how to do,
Uh-huh.
right? And so the gotta do's are the things that we've trained them to do. Those are the great. That's the carpentry, the big carpentry.
Hmm.
The oughta do's are the finishings, the internal finishings if we're building a building, and the nice to do's are the cabinet making,
Yeah.
the finer details. That the expert advice is often useful at the ought to do, or the between the ought to do and the nice to do,
Mm.
right? Once they've got the big chunk, then we can begin to finesse.
Yeah.
But we give you another example is most shooting gunfire stuff that is taught with the basics first.
Yeah.
They're teaching all of these fine little detail stuff and finger discipline and trigger control and the proper grip and the sight alignment and the looking for the front sight instead of the target and all of the really hard stuff
Yeah.
first, thinking that if we don't teach that, they're never going to learn how to shoot. But the way that we're teaching that, there's some emotions involved because people are uncomfortable in a lot of ways dealing with guns for the first time. And so we're teaching it in a static way. And so a lot of the early contextual experience they're getting, primacy and recency, we go back to the basic psychology of learning
Mm.
with the thing we did first and the thing we did most recently with the most emotional content. That is the thing that they're learning in the early days. I think that we're going completely backwards. I would rather teach you how to gunfight first,
Yeah.
and be ugly about it.
Mm.
End state, right? Everything should be
Yeah.
end state driven. What is the end state of a gunfight? Shoot something that needs to get shot and don't get shot,
Yeah.
right? And so if we teach that big thing first, then God, who is it? I can't remember the big mouth. When I say big mouth, the big mouth word, the academic phrase for this, it's just escaping me for the moment. But in the end analysis, experts replicate results, not techniques.
Yeah, from Rob Gray. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Rob Gray. Yes,
Yeah.
thank you.
Yeah.
Rob
Yeah.
Gray did
Yeah.
a. In fact, there's I've got Winkleman there, and I've got Gray's book.
Yeah.
Rob Gray's Learning to Optimize Movement and
Yeah.
learn how we learn to move. Three books that are just sitting on my
Yeah.
shelf. How
And
we
I
learn to move.
and
Books.
I talked with Jeff Quayle from Setgun, and
Yeah.
he made a program called Gun Sparring, and it's
Mm.
precisely on yeah, like this, I think. Yeah.
And state first.
Yeah.
And when we think when we think about end state first, a lot of people believe, especially those who are big believers in conventional gunfire and the conventional range because that's where they live. They spent decades trying to get that range built, and now
Yeah.
I finally got my range that I can utilize. And I'm saying get off the range. I'd
Yeah.
rather have you learn how to gunfight first.
Mm.
And so with that, we think about the sport of hockey.
Mm-hmm.
And hockey is a very aggressive game intelligence sport,
Yeah.
right? And so with with that sport, could a hockey player benefit from precision skating lessons from a figure skater? Honest question.
I don't. I think. I don't think it's the best way of spending your time. No.
Well, it might not be the best way of spending your time, but let's just make it a little bit more simple. Could an aggressive hockey player benefit from being able to skate in a precise way more efficiently?
He could.
Yeah,
Yeah.
because if you're trying to go where the puck is going,
Yeah.
and people are on the ice doing really fast things, precision skating
Yeah.
lessons benefits you,
Yeah.
right? And so a good aggressive hockey player could benefit from precision skating lessons. Would a precision skater, a figure skater, benefit from adding the aggressiveness of hockey into his sport?
That's a beautiful question.
Yeah, answer to that is absolutely not.
Yeah. No.
No. And so we spend far too much time figure skating and not enough time hockey playing.
Yeah.
And so we get trapped into the figure skating model.
Why are we doing that? Because it's so how do you call it? It's such a logic, and I I'm talking with this all my whole life, also in martial arts. And when I was doing judo, I made all those throws, and they should be done more, better, better, better. And then I was doing randori, and I was thrown all over the place. Why? Yeah, because I didn't get the answer. Also with gunfighting, why are people holding on to that?
Because you get really, really good at the wrong thing,
Mm,
and you build a belief system. Beliefs are ideas stabilized by emotion.
mm.
I'll say that again.
Beliefs
Beliefs
are
are
ideas stabilized by
ideas
emotion.
stabilized by emotion.
Yeah,
And when you've got a lot of emotional buy-in to the environment that you've spent your life working in, and when you start seeing all of the precision shooters out
yeah,
there that spend all of their time on hits and splits,
yeah,
right? That is the thing. That is the gold standard. And if I can shoot a lot faster and work that trigger and get the bullets closer together, then I am really, really good. But when you look at a lot of the gun gamers that are shaving seconds, they're doing things that are inconsistent with safe gun handling procedures in the interest of time to get a Bianchi Cup, right?
yeah.
And I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that.
Oh, no.
Own your sport.
Yeah,
That's great. But in a gunfight, if I could, here's something that was given to me by one of my students from the Australian military.
mhm,
He was struggling, really, really good guy, and he was struggling with some principles in the training to get him to his top unit. And one of the things that I'd say, if I had one patch that I could put on the back of every single candidate that they could look at as they're going through, it would be STFD.
slow the fuck down. Yeah,
Right?
yeah,
And so their organization took that as a mantra, but that doesn't comport with training at the speed of life, which now a lot of those who are studying it from an academic perspective are
Mhm.
saying that we need to be training at the speed of threat.
Mm.
Okay, I kind of get that. But what I'd rather do is train ugly first and reduce the technique driven so that we're not so focused on the technique that we don't accomplish the end state.
Yeah.
And if we slow down at the early phases of this, one of my students from the 2nd Commando Regiment, Dan Tolley, Warrant Tolley, I was trying to explain what it is that I do to one of the organizational commanders. And my explanation wasn't going so well. And Dan pulled out a sheet of paper and he drew this spectacular curve. It's an upward sloping curve. And Tim Lee and I tried to have a conversation about this, but I didn't explain it well to Tim because
Uh-huh.
you said the curve is backwards. You need to flop it the other way in order to create the learning curve. But the Tolley curve is a just a bunch of smoothed out learning curves.
Hmm.
And so you got a little learning curve like that, a little learning curve like that. And the tempo which you get from crawl, walk, run, and assess is how you get to this. This is where you want to end up. This is where your trainers want to get you there. But that's not how people learn.
No.
People learn. Heraclitus, right? The Peloponnesian philosopher that
Yeah.
said out of 100 people in combat, 10 shouldn't be there, 80 are targets, 9 are good fighters, and one's a warrior. That the training world is populated with nines and ones.
Mm.
And this is where nines and ones live. The 80s and the 10s don't live here. The 80s and the 10s do that and then do that. So there's this huge capacity gap that the nines and the ones absolutely hate.
Yeah.
Come on, we got to go. Aim
Yeah.
faster, be better, do harder. And so there's a lot of people that get crushed in the early phase of this. But I guarantee you that if people have the tools, tenacity, capacity to get to this,
Hmm.
80s, the 80s and the 10s will get there by doing this, the slow upward slope with a bunch of little successes in the learning curve.
Yeah.
And if I've got somebody that can't hit a target at 20 feet, I bring him to 2.
Yeah.
I bring him to 2 and I put him on there with an airsoft gun that doesn't make a noise and jump around. And I get them to punch that gun out in front of them and
Yeah.
work the trigger and get that at 2 feet. And I go, look at you, you steely-eyed pistolero. Look at what you just did. That's your end state. Do that. But hey, listen, if you can do it from 2 feet, what do you think you can do it
Yeah.
from? And then we back up a little bit. And then at
Great.
4 feet, we start shuffling a little bit to the left and the right. And then at some point we have to
Yeah.
recognize the full. Remember, learning does not occur at the range. Skating does not get learned on the ice. It's the consolidation. It's the offline learning.
Yeah.
You need to know when they're full because once they're full, all of the things that we're
Yeah.
teaching them beyond full
Yeah.
start dropping off the back
Yeah.
because there's
Yeah.
no consolidation going to occur. But that's an individual approach to learning.
Yeah.
And so how do we take a bunch of people as individuals and get them all to this at the same time if we don't completely reorganize the way we're doing this?
Yeah. 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 Great, Ken. And so, summarizing till now, so we talked about asking questions and the relationship with feedback, different forms of feedback, um, about where to start, with precision or with the raw stuff,
Huh?
and well, we did so much. Um, can you please give us some insights for now, also about, because there I'm struggling with. Today I'm very involved in emergency medicine, and we do a lot
Yes.
of simulation. I learned, by the way, a lot in emergency medicine about simulation training. But I'm still struggling with what are intervention points in scenarios. I have to say it better, in scenarios. So traditionally, we in Holland, we developed a model where we said if they are good enough for the scenario, they had already their stuff good together, the technical, tactical, and so on. And we only we let them play the scenario, and afterwards we debrief. If not, if they're not freezing up, if they are not making deadly mistakes. But for the most part, we do not coach them in the scenario. This was, and I think we in medicine do the same right now. But what are intervention points? When do you say, now I'm going to ask questions, now I'm giving feedback?
Why don't you coach